Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Just tying up these sweet peas, which actually I only planted a few days ago. And I held back from planting them, not because I was worried about the cold, but because it was so dry. We didn't have any rain here at all for the whole of April. And the one thing that sweet peas hate more than anything else is drought. Well, thankfully we've had some rain. Looks like we might get some more today too. So the sweet peas can go out, it's warm enough, it's wet enough. And I keep tying them up once a week for the first 4 weeks or so, just to keep them upright. And by then the tendrils will cling to whatever support you give them, and then they can be left. And of course, by about the middle of June, with any luck, we should start picking the flowers. On today's programme, comedian Susan Calman phones a friend to help her begin the transformation of her brand new garden from blank canvas to the garden of her dreams.
I'm just going to give you a couple of keywords. Bountiful, glamorous, Hollywood, Greta Garbo. That's kind of where I'm
You've
thinking.
just described yourself beautifully.
We go to Devon to meet a young gardener who has become captivated by the combination of alpines and daphnes.
Collecting daphnes have definitely become a bit of an obsession of mine. It's at an unhealthy level, I'd say.
And I shall be dividing, repotting, and also planting out an agapanthus. We're reorganising the mound, and we'll be following that progress over the coming weeks and months. But part of that reorganisation meant moving the stone troughs that we've had up there for the last 4 or 5 years growing alpines. And I put them here in the herb garden. And the relationship between the stone and the cobbles, I think, works well already, and I think they look good in here. Now, alpines, of course, are little jewels. They don't leap out at you. Perfect for a trough or even a little pot. But however you're planting them, there is one key factor that they all need, which is drainage. Now, if you've got a stone sink, then it will have a sink hole. And it's really important that that doesn't get blocked, which is one of the reasons why I'm clutching a tea towel. Now, what I'm going to do is take a piece of hessian here and just place it over the drainage hole there. Anything that will stop it getting blocked by the soil. And then I'm going to put a layer of grit. That means the roots will never sit in cold, damp compost. And then over the top of that, I'm going to put an old tea towel and just place it over, and that will stop the soil mixing with the grit. Now, on top of that, I've mixed up a gritty potting mix and spread it over the tea towel. Any peat-free compost mixed with grit, 50-50, will do the job fine. Right, now we are ready to start thinking about our plants. Now, I've chosen a selection where the flowers are predominantly pink and will take the flowering from spring into summer. Now, first of all, I've got here a Saponaria Bressingham. Lovely little simple pink flowers. So that can go there. It will spill over the edge of the trough. And then I've got an Erodium Matilda's Purple. And it's like a little geranium flower. And we'll put this one over here, near the front. Now, this is something I've never come across before. It's a little alpine iris, a miniature iris, and I couldn't resist it. Let's put that in the middle where it's going to get most sun, and around it a pair of phlox, a little white Phlox Douglasii, Ice Mountain. That can go in there like that. Now, actually, once you get the basic conditions right of plenty of sun, lots of drainage, most alpines are pretty easy to grow. Next, fill in the gaps with compost. Now, even though it's starting to rain, and even though drainage is important, they do need water. And by and large, rain should be enough. But I'm just going to water these in. And we have this surreal picture of an Englishman in his garden watering his plants as the rain hammers down. And that should, if I've got it right, drain well and quickly. And then I can dress it. Top dressing like this does two things. It looks good, and also it stops the rain splashing compost up onto these very delicate little flowers. And you can add to that if need be. And there we are. Now, I've been the first to admit that I'm no alpine expert, but it's fun learning about them. However, we went to visit a true expert down in Devon. His name is David Carver. And despite his youthful years, he has already created a fascinating collection of alpines of all kinds.
The reason why I love alpine plants, they're so varied. Everyone sees an alpine plant as plants that grow above the tree line, but you also get woodland plants. They come in all shapes and sizes, and at times you might not always notice them. They could be hidden away in crevices or under other plants. They're some of the prettiest plants you could ever find. They're definitely small plants in the big plant world. My name's David, I'm 24 years old. I live on the edge of Dartmoor, and this is my alpine heaven. My parents owned a plant nursery, and I've been surrounded by plants my whole life. There wasn't a time that I wasn't helping in the plant nursery or growing something in the garden. You would just lose a whole day playing around out in the muck and getting hosed down at the end of the day. At the age of 20, I had the opportunity to take over this tunnel. At first, it was projects between me and my dad, but slowly and surely I took over more, and over the years built a crevice bed, planted a few trees, and added another alpine bed, and now I have this. For some people, they would have asked for a car or have wanted a trip abroad, but for me, this is everything. There's a huge array of plants in this tunnel. There's succulents, small shrubs, alpines, but my truest passion out of all of them has got to be Daphnes. Everyone's familiar with Daphne odora. It's a nice small shrub, highly fragrant flowers at the end of winter, but Daphnes aren't just for Christmas. There's so much potential and variety. They will flower pretty much every time of the year, and there's not a day that they're not in flower. So it's almost like it's Christmas every day. A key part to growing these plants right is getting the soil right. For woodland plants, you'd be looking at adding more leaf mould or fine bark chippings. And then for plants that you'd find on mountains, you would definitely look at having a huge rate of sharp sand, grits, and keeping it really quite harsh. Daphnes hate root disturbance, so make sure when you're planting them, that's going to be their place, or if you're wanting to grow them in a pot, grow them in a nice long tom or chimney pot. This is the first alpine bed I built with my dad. It's filled with alpine Daphnes. This is Daphne modesta. It's got amazing yellow flowers and it moulds itself around the rocks there. It's a real splash of colour that you can see from the other end of the tunnel. And to the back there, we have my favourite, Daphne genqua. It's looking incredible at the moment. It's taken 2 years to get to this height, and at the moment it's plastered in lovely lilac flowers. And over here, we have some great shrubby Daphnes. Daphne tangutica has beautiful, fragrant flowers, first starting as pink and then opening to white. Has really nice glossy leaves and is also great for the open ground or in a pot. You don't need cover or protection. It's a great place to start. Being in this space, you're caught by so many different colours and you're surrounded by bees and birds, and the scent from the Daphnes can be overbearing. In the height of summer, I can only spend probably 30 minutes at times without getting a headache. It's beautiful. Collecting Daphnes have definitely become a bit of an obsession of mine. I currently grow 33 species and a whole load of hybrids. It's at an unhealthy level, I'd say. I'm constantly on the hunt for new and exciting Daphnes. One plant that I'm trying to find, which is a Daphne that my dad created and named after my mum. It's called Daphne Alison Carver. He can't quite remember what it looks like, and I'm constantly trying to look through databases, and so far no luck. So if there is anyone out there that has a very old plant of Alison Carver, I would love to possibly swap plant material or trade a few of my plants for this one. I would be very grateful. Having the space to grow and build a passion that I love has definitely built me as a person, where I was once quite shy, but I have now built something that I am so proud of, and now I just want to share it with everyone.
Well, thank you, David, for sharing your knowledge and enthusiasm for alpines and Daphnes. And I'm sure lots of people will now want to try and grow them as a direct result of seeing what you've achieved. Well, Nellie is loving being made a fuss of on the sea, and Patty I've had to carry around in the garden because she hates the wet. And it's been a very showery day and looks to be set to be showery for the rest of the week. But she can see the glorious Camasias just as well as anyone else. And this year the colours do seem to be extra intense. And they love it here in the damp garden. They like damp soil. The one thing I would say is it can be a bit of a thug. So if you plant it in a border, either have other plants that can cope with them, but if you've got more delicate plants, you may have to thin the Camasia after they flower. Just dig up either the side shoots or the main plants every other year or so and just reduce the number just to stop them spreading too much and dominating a border. Right, it's time now to pay our first visit this week to one of your gardens. And we're off to the Netherlands and the garden of Reshmi Sarkar.
Hi everyone, welcome to our 2-meter square balcony garden in Amsterdam. Let me show you around how we make the most out of the space. Last autumn, we planted some crocus, hyacinths and tulips in this planter. It has been a great spring display, with the cotinus providing a colorful background. Now we are getting ready for summer, with the marigolds, cosmos and silver cups already out in the sun. Our guest room has a south-facing window and acts as our greenhouse. Here we have the saplings that will eventually go out into the planter this summer. We got these bulbs as a gift, and it has gladiolus, freesia and allium mix. Since we are running out of space, we will layer it up and see how it goes. Let's pot these, starting with a base layer, and then first I am putting the gladiolus as they can be potted quite deep. Next, cover this up with a layer of soil. Now it's turn of the freesias. Just make sure to put the pointed sides up. Another layer of soil, and lastly putting in the alliums. To finish off the job, providing a good dose of water. Our balcony is getting ready for the summer. Hope we get a good harvest of apples as we enjoy our little balcony garden.
I love the thought of Reshmi growing apples on her balcony, and the blossom look fantastic. Now, this is a great time of year for wildlife gardening. The wildlife garden here at Longmeadow is really coming to life after a very dry period. Of course, what is really important to the pollinators are flowers, starting as early as you can in the year and carrying on for as long as possible. Now, into this spot, I'm adding an agastache. This is Agastache blackadder, and Agastache is one of the favourite plants for bees. It has these spires of flowers, rich purple, from midsummer right into early autumn. Give it some sunshine, reasonable soil, and that will be a magnet for the bees. But back here, I've got a bit of space, and I'm going to put something in rather taller, and that is a hollyhock. Now, hollyhocks are fantastic for insects. Nice, open, big flowers. But if you are going to buy hollyhocks, particularly to encourage wildlife, do buy singles rather than doubles. And that means that each flower is a simple saucer-shaped flower rather than with convoluted petals, because many insects, including honeybees, find it difficult to access the pollen and nectar from complicated flower heads. Hollyhocks do best with a bit of good drainage and plenty of sunshine. The third plant I'm adding in here is wild clary, which is a native salvia. And it's shorter than the other two, but has lovely blue spikes of flower, and is another that is an absolute favourite for honeybees. So that will grow about 12 inches tall. It's not a big plant, so it wants to be near the front of the border. As much sunshine as you can. Now, if you're going to attract wildlife, you do need water in your garden. That is absolutely essential, but it doesn't have to be a big pond or even a conventional pond at all, as Nick showed when he made a wildlife pond from a barrel.
In the last century, nearly 70% of ponds have been lost from the UK countryside, meaning garden ponds have an increased importance for wildlife. Getting the position right for a wildlife pond is absolutely paramount. Now, looking around this garden, over the other side there is a closed fence, so it's not going to provide good access for wildlife. Whereas over here, there are open corridors through this fence where they can come through. This is also a great spot. It's partially shaded, and ideally you'd be looking for about 50-50 light and shade. Now, there's a misconception that for wildlife ponds to be effective, they need to be large, or you need to install a huge liner. But actually, that's not the case at all. I'm going to be using this old barrel to plunge into the ground just here, but it worked just as effectively placed on top of a patio. In fact, size really doesn't matter. You could even use something as small as an old washing up bowl, and you still attract wildlife into the garden. This half barrel costs around £60. Make sure you soak your barrel beforehand to get the wood to swell up and make it watertight. The barrel's totally secure now, completely level, so it's time to think about the needs of the plants. They all want to be at slightly different heights. So I'm going to create what's called a marginal shelf around the back edge of the pool. And the great thing about using bricks with holes in them means that you create extra habitats for wildlife to hide away in. To get the most diversity in a wildlife pond, you want to get a really good, diverse range of plants. So I'm going for an iris to start with. It's a beautiful purple flower. Now, this is in an aquatic basket, which means it's absolutely full of holes. There's aquatic soil in there. Plants will root out of it, and it's very happy just to go straight into the pool as it is. This is an equisetum. Stays evergreen year-round. Also really useful for so many wildlife species which will lay eggs and larvae on the base. Now I'm going to use this. This is Carex pendula. It's a transitional plant that can grow both as a marginal and as a woodlander. So I'm going to put this here and then plant some more on the far side so it transitions out of the pool. And the water spearmint is the final of the marginals, and it will slowly work its way across the surface of the pool, providing that essential shade, but also foraging areas for lots of insects that like to swim around and feed in the foliage. When you're filling up your pond, it's ideal to use rainwater from a water butt. Try and avoid tap water, as it contains chlorine. However, if you do need to use tap water, let it stand for a few days to allow it to neutralise, and don't use water from other ponds, as this can spread disease. For the centrepiece of this pond, I'm using a miniature water lily. Of course, it has the beautiful flowers that everybody knows, and it provides a habitat for water snails to lay their eggs on the back of the leaves. When you're planting your wildlife pond, cover about 70% of the surface with plants. This will reduce the chances of algal bloom, and it will also give lots of hiding places for the wildlife. Now all the planting's done in the pond, it's worth thinking about the peripheries. So I'm going to use rocks for a wildlife bridge, and then further plants around the back. For a bit of contrast, I'm going to use this ligularia. It prefers a slightly damp soil, so each time that the pond floods when it's rained, it will keep it nice and moist. And then the final element, this is Dryopteris filix mass. And that will just help all the planting transition into everything else around it. Now, to keep the pool totally free of algae or duckweed, I'm going to use a special product. It's a dye, totally non-toxic. It won't hurt humans, won't hurt animals, and it won't hurt your plants. Putting the gloves on just to make sure it doesn't dye my skin. And the way it works is that it knocks out a lot of the light, and so some of the pond nasties, like blanket weed or algae, are prevented from photosynthesizing. You only need the tiniest little quantity, and it'll keep the pool dark and weed-free for about 3 months, and then you just need to retreat it. Wildlife ponds are a great way of getting kids involved with the garden, with nature and with wildlife. If you're worried about their safety, you can use a steel grid or a mesh over the top of the pool to protect them from the water. Now that this is installed, it's going to bring all sorts of benefits to this garden. Not only is there a new growing environment to experiment with different plants, it's also a brand new habitat that will bring in birds, insects, and amphibians.
It never fails to astonish me that if you make a pond in your garden, within hours you will start to see damselflies and dragonflies. They come as if by magic. It works. It's the best thing you can do for wildlife in the garden. Now, in mid-March, in the first programme of this series, I sowed a couple of types of chilli. There was de Cayenne, which is a hot chili. It's not desperately hot, but it's got a definite poke to it. And padron, which is much best eaten green when it's not hot. And I suggested that some of you might like to grow them along with me. So we've sown the seed, we've pricked them out, and now we're ready to go to the next stage. Now you can see that actually they're very different. De Cayenne is much smaller than padron, half the size, but you can also see with De Cayenne that if I take it carefully out the pot, that is not ready to be potted on. When you can see more soil than root, it means it's not really ready to move. So I'm going to put that carefully back in and leave these. However, if you look at padron, you can see that we've got to the point where there is at least as much root as soil on show. So I am going to pot up the padron now, and the De Cayenne, I will keep checking them, and they'll probably be ready in about 10 days. And these are my chili growing pots. And this is what, 20 to 25 centimeters diameter. If you have it too big, you tend to have more plant and less fruit. Too small and they're stunted. But this is perfect. Now, if you put the plant in so it's about the right height, so the plant is still in its plastic pot, and then fill compost around that. This is a peat-free potting compost, and I've added extra perlite for drainage. And then take it out like that. You've got a space where the pot was, and then you can just pop it back in. Hey presto. I will keep this in the greenhouse, water it daily, and then hopefully we'll start to get flowering, and then the fruits will form before very long. Now, still to come on today's programme. We go to Glasgow to see comedian Susan Calman get cracking on her brand new garden with a little help from a long-distance friend.
Do you think you could just give me the two biggest measurements?
Yeah, watch this. It's like Chariots of Fire. It's the most graceful thing you'll have ever seen in your entire life. Hold on a second.
And we have another chance to visit the garden of the ecologist and urban landscaper, Professor James Hitchmore, who uses his own garden as a test bed for his planting experiments. But first we go to Barnsley to join Johnny and his brother, who have a brilliant idea for growing strawberries.
This is me and my brother Louis. And this is our lovely garden. The main reason why we are here is that our slugs keep on eating our lovely strawberries. So that's why our beautiful dad came up with an idea of having something called the strawberry wall. It's made from recycled reinforced metal mesh. Dad has just tied this to the wall with some wire here. We're using some wire which has been cut by wire cutters. Then all we do is get one of these and you put this here just so we can just balance gently on the strawberry wall, and then what you do is just push that in until it's secure, and then voila, you can't go anywhere. Ta-da! We have finished our strawberry wall. The strawberry wall has a lot of advantages. The first one is, like I say, it's a lot of space, and the other ones are that the snails and slugs can't get to them. But the only way they can get to them is climb up or swim the frog-infested pond. Dun, dun, dun.
And the last trick is, it saves water. A strawberry waterfall. Yay! Say goodbye.
Bye!
Bye!
Johnny and Louis, I think you are geniuses. That's a fantastic idea. And I can see households all across the country immediately copying it. There will be strawberry walls and strawberry waterfalls right across the land. My own strawberries are actually growing in an old cattle trough this year. So hopefully the slugs and snails won't get them. They're young plants, but they're already in flower and we should have a harvest in a month or so's time. Now I've got here a couple of courgette plants that I've been growing on. This is a variety called Romanesco with a distinctive dark green ribbed skin, and it's one of my favourites. My courgettes last year were absolutely hopeless. They were a disaster. So this year I'm determined to crack it. Now I've grown these from seed. It's not too late to sow them now. You can either sow them under protection or even sow them direct, and I'm sure you can buy plants from garden centres and nurseries. So I'm going to plant one in the middle there and one there, and that's about the sort of spacing you need. About 1 metre between plants. By giving them more space, they're going to get more goodness, the roots will spread wider, and the plants will be healthier, and there will be more fruits. These are plants that love sunshine, heat, lots of water to drink, and lots of rich goodness. Now, the best way to give them the goodness that they love is by adding compost. And this raised bed has been mulched thickly with garden compost, and that is the best thing that any plant could possibly have. You don't need to start feeding these in the ground. When you plant them, and you can see this is ready for planting out. It wasn't ready any earlier. This is about right. You always want to see the roots on the outside of the pot. Don't bury them any deeper, but make a little saucer shape in the soil like that, and then plant it at the bottom of it. And that means that when you water, effectively you're filling that saucer with water, so you get more water into the ground. And I only will water these if it hasn't rained for about 5 or 6 days. And that will be fine. There we go. Now hopefully those will flourish, and I would expect to be harvesting the first fruits in 4 or 5 weeks' time. One of the joys of being an experienced gardener is you know there's always next year. But when you're starting out and you're faced with a new garden, everything can seem a bit overwhelming, if not downright perplexing. And that's the situation that the comedian Susan Cullman has found herself in. She's been tackling the garden of her home in Glasgow, but Susan doesn't quite know where to begin. So she felt that she should turn to Gardener's World for some help and guidance.
Hello Gardener's World, I'm so excited to have you here in sunny Glasgow. Honestly, the weather's always like this. Let me tell you where we are. I bought this house about 4.5 years ago with my wife, and we're in the front garden. Lots of lovely mature trees and shrubs and bushes. I don't know what they all are, but they're very, very beautiful. But it's the back garden. That's where the transformation's really happening. So here we are. It's quite difficult to describe just how different the garden is from what it was before, because until 3 weeks ago we didn't have a garden at all. So this area was all gravel. There was no grass at all. We had the grass laid. We demolished the whole thing. 37 tonnes of soil delivered. And just last week I went to the garden centre, as many people do, and bought some plants. Now the issue is, I'm not an expert gardener. I'm not really a novice gardener. If there's a level below novice, that's what I am. But I have something that is the envy of people across the country. I have a hotline to Gardener's World, to the lovely Adam Frost. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give Adam a call, and I'm going to see if he can help me with this blank canvas with some hints and tips. It is so exciting. It is like having the phone number of Beyonce. Hi Adam, it's Susan here.
Hello, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you.
But what have you been up to?
Well, it's a very simple thing, Adam. I have a brand new garden and I need your help with it. I mean, it's a simple prospect, really, isn't it? Do you want to see it?
Go on, let's go.
OK, I'll put my phone on my selfie stick. Hold on a second. Let me turn the camera around so you can actually see the garden. Not that I'm not lovely, of course, but OK, here we go.
There we go, there we go. So first of all, tell me how long you've been there.
So, been in the house for 4.5 years. Just got the garden done 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Wow, so really you've taken it more or less back to a fresh canvas, haven't you?
Yes.
So on that point, give me an idea, you know, in that space where the sun comes up and where the sun goes down.
OK, so, sun comes up there.
Yep.
That's south about here. And then we get the sun all day long and it finishes off literally. This part here gets the sun, you know, from midday until the end of the day. So it's south facing.
Understanding where the sun moves throughout the day is important for atmosphere. And I think that's one of the things for me is understanding from you how you want the garden to feel.
OK, so it's very simple, Adam. I'm just going to give you a couple of keywords. Bountiful, glamorous, Hollywood, Greta Garbo. That's kind of where I'm thinking.
You've just described yourself beautifully. Hey, I can see you now. You're gonna waltz out on a Sunday morning with glass in hand, elegantly travel down the steps into your new paradise.
You know, it's like you're in my head, Adam, with a little cocktail in the morning.
Brilliant. Do you think you could just give me the 2 biggest measurements, even if it's just walking across the garden?
OK. I have a feeling I'm being set up.
No, you're not. I am being serious. Seriously, anybody that's going to create their garden, understanding the size of the space, I mean, I would say to you that probably better off really measuring it and getting it on a piece of paper. 15
Kalman strides. That way.
Right, cool. And then across the garden?
Yeah, watch this. It's like Chariots of Fire. It's the most graceful thing you'll have ever seen in your entire life. Hold on a second. 17, 18, 19, 20. So 20 Kalman strides.
What I like straight away is the L, because it gives you that opportunity to actually create a little bit of sort of mystery, tension and surprise, you know. You can have hidden areas.
I would love that. A garden full of mystery and tension. That's the dream. That's the dream.
So it does look like you've been busy, Susan. And I suppose the first thing that we really need to understand is what soil you've got in your garden.
I can tell you where the soil came from, Adam. Brace yourself.
Go on.
It came from a packet. Come on, I'll let you have a look at it.
Oh, I knew this was going to be challenging.
OK, Adam, I'm going to plant you. Hold on a second. You're almost the first thing I've planted in this garden, Adam.
First thing we're going to do, actually get your hand right in the soil and then squeeze it really tightly like I am, you know, between your hands and just open your hand up and see what happens. So actually it starts to fall apart, doesn't it? And I don't know if you can see mine, mine's actually stayed stuck together. You know, so that says that there's an awful lot of clay in my soil, but yours sounds quite sandy.
So when we got the beds put in, we got some soil put in, and then what I've done over the course of the past couple of weeks is put compost in it to try and get the soil to a better standard. Was that the right thing to do?
See, you're already making me smile, because the moment that, first of all, we understand our soil and then we put that goodness into the soil year on year, your plants will thank you.
It's too early to be planting a whole load of veg outside in April, isn't it?
I always, as a simple rule in the veg garden, don't tend to start sowing until the weeds start growing.
Do you know what a lovely thing? Once the weeds start growing, you can start sowing. That's the start of our new book that we're going to write together about gardening.
That would sell, I think.
Yeah, I think that would sell. Well, to my mum, probably.
Yeah.
Adam, I went to the garden centre and I bought a few bits and pieces.
Go on, I'm slightly nervous at this point.
Adam, never be nervous. It's not like I would impulse buy a pear tree. So I impulse bought a pear tree, Adam.
Go on, what else?
This gorgeous blackcurrant plant, because, I mean, it just looked really beautiful. So I think if we could start with this one, Does it need lots of sun?
Yeah, lots of sun and maybe against, you know, a sunny wall.
I think I've got the perfect bed for it over here. Okay, the blackcurrant. So I'm going to take you over here.
Hey, I feel like I'm there.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I think that's spot on. I mean, how much planting have you done? You know,
I mean, I've planted stuff. I'm not going to say I've never planted anything in my life, but whether or not I've done it correctly or not, I'm not sure.
yeah. So, I mean, simply with something like that, I would have that so the stems were slightly in the ground, and because that'll encourage new shoots on your currant.
So in terms of the depth, I've dug a hole, so I'm just going to stick it in. I know it's difficult for you to see. I don't know if that's deep enough.
Yeah, I would say you got to go a little deeper at the moment.
A little deeper.
Yeah. This is a lovely way to garden.
I'm finding this really relaxing.
How far do you think you are above the compost level?
Maybe about a half an inch, something like that.
Yeah, probably could go a little bit deeper. Probably, sorry. I'm not doing it on purpose, I promise you.
It's fine, Adam. Don't worry about it. I'm having a lovely day. There, that's better.
Is that better? Yeah.
That's
and
better.
then you know that what's going to happen is you're going to encourage, you know, shoots from down below. All you want to do now, give that a really good watering, and that's it. That should really get rocking and rolling.
Now, I've got my impulse buy pear tree that I need to deal with. I need 2 hands to move it because it's quite hefty. So I'll take it to where I think I want it. Okie dokie. Give me a second. All right. Let me show you, Adam, where I was thinking of putting the pear tree.
So come away a little bit so I can see the wider landscape. 5 years' time, 6 years' time, that tree's really started to grow on. How do you think that's going to connect to the trees around you?
I think it'll meld into one. It'll put our garden into their garden. I think it'll be beautiful.
Can you see the hedge that runs along?
Yeah.
What I've done is I've chosen trees that will fit the voids and connect with the trees behind. And I think that's, for me, one of the things, you know, especially in town spaces, you know, a lot of us worry about being overlooked and we worry about privacy, but sometimes there's some great things as well in other people's gardens that we can bring into our own.
I can't thank you enough for this because honestly, it's quite an intimidating thing starting off in the garden and you've been an absolute delight. So thank you so much.
No, bless you. But you remember what I said, you know.
It's just about getting your hands in the soil and putting a smile on your face, all right?
Oh, that's the second chapter of our inspirational book about gardening.
You just look after yourself.
You too, my darling. See you soon. Bye.
Well, I wish you good luck, Susan, and it's a lovely place to be starting out on a garden. The one bit of advice I would give, which really echoes what Adam has said, is take your time. Allow it to take as long as you need for the garden to become an expression of your personality as much as a piece of horticulture, and enjoy every second of it. Now, the courgettes are in the ground, but there is a lot of empty soil which they haven't yet used up. They will fill this space in a month or so's time. So to accompany the courgettes and use the space, I'm going to plant some dwarf French beans. And those will grow very happily alongside the courgettes, and I can harvest them before these become too invasive. And French beans are another plant that responds well to heat. It's no good sowing these if the ground is cold, but it's warming up now. And you can see that dwarf beans are quite small, and they should be planted out at about 6-inch intervals. Now, this is a variety called purple teepee. Lovely purple pods, which turn green when you cook them, but taste really good. Now, it's time to pay our final visit to one of your gardens this week, and we're going to London, and the garden of Leslie Wisby, who has got a rather special horticultural tip to share with us.
This is my beloved garden. I spend all my time out here. It is my favourite room in the house. I grow many of these plants from seed. We have a beautiful old oak tree at the back. And I also have an allotment. But you know, there's not really the right place anywhere in this garden for a greenhouse, and we're not allowed them on the allotment. So I have one top tip for anyone wanting to grow their own plants from seed. And that is find a tolerant partner, because this is my conservatory. And as you can see, there's maybe a slight space for my husband and I. Oh, and maybe one other tip, if you are going to do this in your house, it's a good idea to get something to protect the floor, because there's tolerance and there's tolerance.
Very good gardening advice there, Leslie. It's hard enough battling the weather without battling the person you share your life or your house with. Now, I would stress we love getting your films, so please share them with us and then we can all enjoy them. If you go to our website, you'll get all the details you need to send us your films, and we look forward to seeing them. Now, I've got here two different types of agapanthus. This is an evergreen kind with white flowers, which keeps its leaves right through winter. And this is a deciduous agapanthus. It's got lovely, rich blue flowers. And this is the new growth that has all appeared in the last few weeks. But it's been in this pot a long time, and it's time to pot it on. Now, getting it out of the pot might be a lot easier to say than to do, so bear with me as I struggle. Agapanthus can get very woody roots. Right, let's try, see if that's worked at all. Ah, there we go. Yeah. Voila, look at that. Right, you can see the extent to which that is root bound. Now, I was brought up that agapanthus flowered best, were happiest, if this is how their roots were. Completely root bound, and they would flower perfectly, and this is what you had to aim at. But I've been talking to agapanthus growers over the last few years, and all of them say the same thing, is that's a little bit of an urban myth. That is not necessarily the case, and actually, if you give them a bit more goodness and a bit more room, they will be happier, healthier, and flower better. So I'm going to do a little experiment. I'm going to cut this in half. I'm going to repot half with a bit of extra goodness and see how that fares, and the other half I'm going to plant into the dual garden. Right, I'm going to use an old saw. There we go. So let's take the plant out half and put that to one side and pot this up. We use the same pot. Put this back in, which was so useful in getting it out. Right, this is a very gritty mix, but I have added quite a lot of sieved garden compost, so there's real goodness in there along with the grit. When you're potting like this, use your fingers just to work the compost down so that there's good contact with the roots. If you are going to divide up your agapanthus, this is a good window at the point where they've started to grow, but before they're growing too much. If you leave it too long, they can go into shock, and that will result in no flowers this year. So if you have any chance, this is something to do over the next week or two at the most. Now, I will water that, and the other half, which I've got here, I will pop into this bucket for the moment, take this and plant it in the jewel garden. I'm going to plant this near the path at this spot, which actually faces due south because agapanthus do best with as much sun as you can give them. So really we need to see how this half, which has a huge amount of really rich soil, will that just be all foliage and no flowers, or will that flower well the first year? But for the moment, we'll just let that be. Now we've got a chance to revisit the garden of Professor James Hitchmore. Professor Hitchmore has been one of the pioneers of the style of planting which we saw so brilliantly at the Olympic Park, which used great swathes of plants, often using grasses to great effect, which is both very beautiful and great for biodiversity and sustainability. And his own garden is no exception.
I've been interested in plants for a long time, and I've been experimenting with for a long time. I think I've always had a very curious mind. I try to work out how we can design and manage plantings in cities more effectively. The garden's a laboratory in some ways, not in a serious scientific sense, but it's a laboratory that allows me to test new plants, new combinations of plants, and then potentially apply those to some other aspects of my professional work. I also just want to create a place which is enjoyable to be in. So what makes me a little bit different, perhaps, from other people who design plantings in urban areas is that I wanted to utilise the plants in the wild as a sort of inspiration. I'm currently experimenting with a wide range of South African plants. I've been growing lots of species from seed over the last 10 years. And the reason I'm interested in South African plants is that they're one of the groups of plants which are going to become much more useful in the future in a sort of climate change world. So as British cities warm, as the winters become less cold, many of these species will be really useful to us. South African plants I'm particularly interested in, firstly, some of the succulents. There's a whole range of small succulents which you find at high altitude in South Africa, and some of them, these grow on my green roof, and they could be grown in lots of gardens in the UK. Gladiolus are another genus I'm really interested in. They've got a lot of potential in gardens. Historically, we think of them as these really large flowered ones which you buy in flower shops, which aren't really winter hardy, and you just use them as a summer bulb. However, there's a whole range of species which are increasingly cold tolerant in Britain, and quite a few of those plants I've experimented with in this garden and found out that really in Sheffield there's quite a number of species which are completely reliable and really successful. In total, there's about 700 species in this garden. With me, I tend to use plants as sort of repeating elements right across the garden, so they go back and forth, a bit like shoelaces, they stitch across, and nearly everything in the garden does that. And that just creates a different visual, because when that one thing flowers, there's normally quite a few of them, and they are present across the whole space. And that tends to generate much more of a dramatic feel than you would otherwise get. I really like these tall, sort of naked stems. This is an agapanthus. What I like about these top layer species is many of them are very architectural. And this is something you see a lot in the wild, in a lot of plant communities. These naked stems punching through. And if you look sort of behind me, I think you can see the effect in the rest of the garden of how those stems create a really interesting sort of visual rhythm. It's a way of trying to produce plantings which are perhaps manageable and are highly attractive to people, but are also very useful for supporting biodiversity and wildlife in cities. The challenges from the 21st century as we become perhaps more urban, more dense, is how do we produce landscapes which can do all three of those things? And so this is one of the many possibilities in which how these things could come to pass.
Certainly, James Hitchmore and others have been so influential in the way that many of us are starting to think with one eye on biodiversity and wildlife and sustainability, and the other eye on beauty and productivity. And that combined vision is creating the modern garden, and long may that last. Now, throughout the month of April, I hardly had to do any weeding at all. It was so dry and cold the weeds didn't grow. But my big tip to anybody trying to grow vegetables is keep on top of the weeds. In wet weather like it has been today, you won't be able to hoe because the roots will stick to the soil, so you have to hand weed. But that's all right, it's not a bad idea, and the soil is nice and light and fluffy. So keep on top of your weeds, and that'll save you a lot of time and trouble. Right, I promise not to lecture you anymore, but here are some jobs you can do this weekend. As primulas cease to flower, that is the perfect moment to lift and divide them. Ease the parent plant out the soil and then pull it carefully apart, making sure that each section has a good proportion of the root. Replant one section into the original hole, and then you have new plants to spread elsewhere around the garden. As you start to see the emerging foliage of potato plants, this is the moment to earth them up. If you're growing them in ridges, you draw the soil up over them. Or if you're in a raised bed, like mine are, simply put a layer of a material over the top. I'm using compost, but you could use grass clippings or straw. Anything that will protect them from frost and also obscure light from any tubers near the surface. Now is the moment to sow biennials, such as foxgloves, wallflowers or sweet william. Sprinkle the seed thinly onto compost, cover them over, water them well and put them somewhere sheltered to germinate. And when the seedlings are large enough to handle, they can be pricked out and grown on, ready to be planted out in the autumn. One of the many pleasures of this spring has been the way that the tulips have just gone on and on flowering. This particular pot has worked out really well, I think. At the top, you have a tulip called Flyaway with these lily petals rimmed with yellow. And then the mid layer is a tulip called Purple Lady, which has got a good goblet form. And beneath that, I've got a parrot version of Princess Irene, which has got orange flowers streaked with green and purple and pink. Well, that's it for this week. But I will be back here at Longmeadow at 9 o'clock next Friday. So join us all then. Bye-bye.